Hey, what's up guys? Guy in 311 here. Gonna do a little breakdown of my latest little effects shot here, which was a 3D projection, a 3D hologram involving some match moving, some stuff from 3D Studio Max, and then a ton of layers and compositing in After Effects. So first off, let's just scrub through the clip here. You see we have this emitter here with some light, some visible volume light that's casting up, and then obviously the hologram itself, which has a nice flicker effect. It has some of those digital scan lines running through it. All in all, a pretty nice effect. So let's dive right into it. So first here we have our footage, which has already been tracked in my match moving application. I just used the automatic tracking, so there's really not a lot to get into there. There's a ton of tutorials about how to track how to match move footage. One thing I will touch on is to notice all this techies gadgets I have sitting around. Other than looking cool with a sort of a sci-fi shot like this, they do serve a purpose in that I needed something in this shot for my match moving application to actually be able to track some points of contrast. I had shot this beforehand, and as you can see, it's just a brown coffee table and then a brown couch sitting here in my basement, and there just wasn't enough for the software to really grab onto to really get an accurate track. And rather than tweak that for hours on end in the match moving application, it was certainly easier for me to just grab some of this stuff, put it around my table, and then within the first try I was getting a super solid track. So that's something to keep in mind if you're ever going to shoot something like this, maybe, and you just want to do it on your kitchen counter or something. Make sure that there's some elements, whether it be on the countertop or in the foreground or the background, so that your match moving software has enough to actually to grab onto to produce a solid track. Once I was done tracking things and had my camera set up in 3D Studio Max, one of the first things I did was wanted to bring that camera and that tracking point into After Effects as well. From your match moving application, you can export a Maya file, which After Effects will read. If you go to 3D Studio Max and then want to do it that route, there's also a plugin for 3D Studio Max called Max 2, the number 2 AE, that will output a camera and any number of objects from 3D Studio Max. Now, it's worth mentioning that these objects, it's just going to bring them in as null objects, just a point in space. It's not like the Video Copilot Element 3D effect that you can actually bring in 3D models. But what it will bring is tracking markers, or again 3D null layers into After Effects. And you can see I have that highlighted here, and that's moving along nicely with our footage. One thing to mention there is that I always make a point to add a tracking marker, especially in a clip like this, where I know I'm inserting a CG object into a very specific location on the footage. To go back to our example, if you were shooting something on top of your kitchen countertop, I would stick a penny there, or I would stick a little sticky, a little sticky marker with a dot in the middle, which is exactly what I did here. And in the end, as you can see, I did get a perfect tracking marker sitting exactly on top of there in 3D space. And now anything I'm going to add for the rest of this shot, I can just parent its position in 3D space to this tracking marker, and it should stick pretty well. So the first layer we have here on top of our footage, on top of our tracked footage, is this little emitter object that I modeled in 3D Studio Max. If we take a peek at this close up in Photoshop, so you can see it's a lot of chrome. It's got these fins, this big power light emitter in the middle, some copper wiring. Just a cool looking sci-fi model that I thought would look pretty neat as some sort of emitter, some sort of projection element. So drop that into our footage. Right away I can see it's sticking pretty good, so I'm happy with that. And again, you can see the chrome reflections and the blue light being cast on there, how well that looked. And that's certainly something I want to touch on too, which is the fact that I used an HDR inside of a V-Ray to achieve my lighting and my reflections. If you don't know what that is, it's a really cool technique. What it basically is, in its simplest form, it's a mirror ball that you're going to buy, whether that be as simple as a Christmas ornament, or what I'm actually using now is something called a gazing globe, which is this decorative garden element that you might see on a pedestal in somebody's front yard. But again, that's all it really is a spherical mirror ball that you'll insert into your scene. And if we take a look at that, so here's the mirror ball sitting right on my coffee table. You can see all the meters we talked about. Here's a blue light I have cast on there. Here's some other lights in the background. I even have my dog back there. And the process of shooting in HDR is a special setting in your camera where you're going to tell it to shoot a bracketed sequence of photos, which means it's going to shoot the normal exposure of your photo, and then it's going to go up an exposure range and down an exposure range in a sequence, and you can shoot 6, you can shoot 8, and as if I kind of scroll through here, you can see obviously they're getting darker and darker. This one's much brighter, and what it's going to do is give you a full range of the lighting in the shot, and then you use special HDR software to stitch all those photos together into one that 3D applications can then read and be able to utilize for actual lighting and actual reflections. So you'll get, you'll plunk your CG object in there, and it's amazing how well this works. And again, assuming you have a decent camera and a mirror ball, how easy it is to achieve this technique. Alright, so the next area we're going to talk about after we have our CG emitter in there is the actual central light here, this glowing core light piece here. Years ago, I may have sat in 3D Studio Max and messed with materials for hours, worrying about luminance channels and glows and post-effect glows and all kinds of settings, and then incurred the increased render times that go along with that. But as you get better techniques, you get faster techniques. And the reality is, what I did is I took this centerpiece, literally just this blue piece right here, isolated it in Max, turned off all the material settings, and just rendered a flat, isolated render of that piece with an alpha channel. So now I'm able to bring that into After Effects as its own layer and just apply a simple After Effects glow. Which is obviously much easier to tweak in real time. It's much easier to see the results right away. I don't have any render time issues. And it's just another thing to think about if you're ever in a situation where you're working in 3D Studio Max and you're worrying about effect that could be just as easy or easier duplicated in a 2D effects program like After Effects, then that's definitely the way to do it, and to not have to worry about necessarily doing everything in your 3D application. So if we add a fill here, we'll just add a white solid fill, and then the classic After Effects glow. I mean, you can see right away it looks really nice. What I usually do with glowing elements like this is I'll duplicate the layer, set the opacity down a good bit, and then even add a blur to that to fan out that glow just a little bit more. Let's see what that looks like. However, obviously it's still just a bright white glow, and we do want a little bit of that bluish tint in there. And so rather than mess with the color of the glow itself, I'm going to do sort of an interesting technique here. So if we grab both our layers and then pre-compose them, which basically means just move them in their own composition, we'll call this glowing light. And now we'll go to our project and open that glowing light comp. What we need to do here is add a black solid behind this. We'll make it comp size, we can just call it black solid. And so here's our full composition with the black solid back there. Now the reason I did that is because what we're going to do is now set this mode to add, and now having that black solid back there will allow us to make use of a really interesting method here, which is to apply a color balance filter. Now this will allow you, at least I think, to have a little bit more fine-tuning, a little bit more control over the color as a whole, rather than having, remember we had the duplicated layer, so if we wanted to change the shade a little bit, we'd have to change it in both layers. So if we bump up blue here, you can see it being affected. Obviously this is more of a cyan. Let's see, maybe add some mid-tone, a little bit of blue and green. And then the shadows are going to be pretty, you're real dark, and then again, you're not going to see they don't have much of effects. We'll put 20 and 20, 20 and 10. And there you go, using a color balance, again, as long as it has that black, in fact, let's check preserve luminosity. Yeah, I do like that. As long as it has that black solid beneath it, you'll be able to apply that effect. And again, I think it's just a little bit, obviously a different way to add your colors, but I think one that's a little bit easier to adjust on the fly. In fact, right now I do want to get a little bit more green in there. Okay, so the next layer we're going to have is a null light, is a lens flare. This is the one piece where I'm going to use an actual paid plugin here. I know Video Copilot makes an awesome lens flare plugin. And you could certainly just do an image search for a lens flare, drag that in as a layer, and then set it to add. But in this case, let's create a new solid layer. We'll call this null light, since it's going to be using a null light factory. And we'll set it to 500 by 500. Now, the first thing we'll do is we'll set it to a 3D layer, because we do want it to move in 3D space using our camera, using the tracked camera and the tracked point that we have here earlier. So what we want it to do is again, we want it to be positioned directly in the middle of our emitter. So we'll grab our position here, copy it, and then paste it to our null light layer. And now you can see it's still filling the screen, and that's because the scale is just too high. So if we grab the scale, move that way down. So now you can see this is moving along, it's perfectly, that's exactly what we want. However, it's kind of skewed in 3D space. It's not facing the camera. And it's kind of confusing because null light is a 2D effect, but in this case it's being applied to a 3D layer. Now we don't want that layer to be skewed in 3D space like that. We want that 2D effect layer to be pointing right at the camera. And luckily After Effects has a handy setting for that. If you go to Layer, Transform, Auto Orient, and then Orient towards Camera, what that's going to do is After Effects will move and adjust that layer around sort of behind the scenes so that it is always facing the camera in our shot. And that's again exactly what we want. So we want our 2D effect sitting on our 3D layer to always be projecting or pointing right at the camera. So let's go to Effect, Null Light Factory, and right away you can see you know what we're going after here. So let's grab the light source location, and the first thing we'll do is we'll push that right in the middle, right along with our point there. Now one issue you can see we're having here is that it's creating a hard edge where because this glow is so soft, it's creating a hard edge where our layer's ending. But remember, we turned the scale down so much that easy enough to fix by just bumping that up. You always want to bump it up a little bit more because you can see it's still moving around, and we don't want the edges of our layer here or here to ever come into our footage. So let's see. So to go into the settings of our light here, let's turn off the poly spread and the star filter. I don't like this ring that it adds here. For an outer color, let's move that over to the blue, cyan. And then our inner color is more of a solid, a little bit more blue. And we'll make this one a little bit brighter, maybe something like that, and let's see what that looks like. So it looks cool, right? It looks good. In fact, let's set our layer mode to add here, which is sort of a classic technique you're always going to do with glows, either add or screen. And let's take our scale way down, even further than that. We really don't want that to be more than just a soft glow. In fact, let's check screen. In this case, I do prefer screen. Add is blowing it out a little bit too much. And again, you can play with these options for days here. I do like to add the stripe here, and we'll take that, turn the softness down a bit, turn the length down. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe bump that up again. And of course we can mess with the opacity here if we're not happy. Again, this is one of those effects you could play with it for hours, just the settings for there. But so now I'm happy with our emitter. I'm happy with the glow itself being cast directly from that light. I mean, it really looks like it's a powerful, powerful sort of core glow there. So next, let's talk about the hologram next, and then after that we'll add that visible volumetric light, and that'll make sense why once we talk about the hologram. So see you in a minute. Alright, so for our hologram, obviously I'm jumping into 3D Studio Max here. We have a pretty simple scene here. We have a spaceship I modeled a few years ago that's sitting up in space a little bit, and obviously along with our tracked camera. What we want to talk about here is the render settings or the material settings to get this solid ship looking more like a hologram. The good news is that's super easy to achieve with a map type. It's a fall-off map type. Now if I bring up the 3D Studio Max help page here, it gives us a good look at what this effect is. It's a super simple effect. Rather than having a model that across the board is just 50% opacity, what it's going to do is sort of light the edges a little bit differently than it's going to light the faces that are facing the camera. And you can see right here, it's based on the angular fall off of the face normals, so the surface of the geometry. Again, I won't get into a whole thing describing how exactly that works, because you can always just check out this page. But again, super easy to add here. What you're going to do is create a map. The diffuse color obviously can be anything you set. For our purposes, we're going to make that nice bright blue. And then what we're going to do is click on our opacity channel here. And for our map type, we're going to select fall off. Now you can mess around with these settings. You could have it, again, the fall off type towards or away, or perpendicular or parallel, all kinds of fun stuff, as well as the viewing direction. In this case, let's see if I drag this on all of our objects here. In this case, the default map is going to produce an effect that that's basically what we're looking for, where again we're seeing that you can see this face is a little bit more transparent, whereas it's a little more solid around here. The way that your fall off map looks will be different based on the model you're applying it to. If we had just a simple sphere in our scene here and applied that same map to it, you can see, again, you can see the result of that effect a little bit more clearly if we made that towards or away. Again, you can see how it's, and in fact, let's take a look at a bunch of different settings here. You can see obviously none of these are really what we're looking for. That looks pretty similar to the original ones. And again, you can play with these for hours on end, but in this case the default settings are usually going to be the best for you. So that's about that. The other thing is remember that we added this to the opacity channel. So if I create our render here, in fact, let's go back to our spaceship. If I create our render here, you can see that it does include an alpha channel, which is what we want. We want it to be actually affecting the transparency, not just the color of the model. So go ahead and render your sequence there again with something with an alpha channel, a PNG or a Targa, and we'll bring that into After Effects and really get that looking like a hologram. Alright, so we're back in After Effects and we have our hologram render here. One thing to point out real quick that I haven't touched on yet. Remember that because it's an image sequence, After Effects is always going to be assuming a frame rate. I shot at 29.97, but let's say you shot at 24 frames per second. After Effects will usually default to 30 frames. Again, it's just a value that it's going to assume. So remember to always go in here, right click, interpret footage, and set that to your frame rate if it is 24. Again, in my case, it's 29.97. But that would certainly cause a big issue if you did shoot at 24 frames and then After Effects was thinking that your sequence was 30 frames a second. That would cause it to appear to be off for the match to not be, or the track to not be as accurate. So that's something you always want to remember to make sure you're doing with your rendered sequences out of your 3D program. So we've added our hologram on top of our footage here. And in its simplest form, it's going to be another layer where we're adding some default glows and then duplicating that layer and reducing the opacity a little bit and maybe softening that glow. So if we go to stylize glow, and again, glow is one of these settings. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no perfect setting, so I won't spend too much time on it here. We'll just adjust these values a little bit. See if turning up that radius looks good. Bump the opacity up or the intensity up or down. Let's see what that does. And we can crank that all the way down, which doesn't look as nice. We can set this to A and B colors, and again, manually add a nice bright bluish here. Let's see what that looks like. That's going to be more of an edge glow, which really, again, isn't what we're after. So let's go back to color channel, original colors. One other thing you can do here is, again, if we turn this glow off, you can see that this model is pretty transparent. What we can do here is go to, let's see, Effects, Matte Choker. If we bump this above our glow here and turn our glow off, this can reduce the edge of a matte. It can, if you're using it for green screening, it could suck in that matte a little bit. But what it can also do is be used to slightly boost that channel. So if we turn this choke to a negative value, you can see that it's actually going to boost that layer. In fact, a good bit in this case. So we can turn that softness up, or again, just adjust this ever so slightly. So in the end, there you go. There's an effect where we've really increased that a good bit. In fact, maybe that's a little too much. But again, certainly a setting you can play with if you feel like your alpha in any footage or render is maybe a little bit too transparent. And then we can see what the glow looks like on top of that, which obviously that's a little bit too much. Again, the next step in the end will be we're going to duplicate this glow layer and expand that glow a little bit. However, before we do that, what we want to do here is add this classic hologram effect, which is those pulsing horizontal scan lines that are so popular, probably made most popular from the Star Wars holograms, but now it seems to be so commonplace. It is an effect I did want to add here. The reality is there's a ton of presets you can buy. You can buy sort of preset templates on Video Hive. There's a couple other plugins you can purchase, but I was able to locate a free preset, a free plugin, which is TV Noise 1.5 preset, and I will include a link to this in the description. But this is a great little free preset effect that we'll use for the horizontal scan lines, but the reality is it does a little bit of everything. It can add noise, it can distort or warp your footage to make it look like a sort of a bad signal. So download that. It has a nice little description here of how to install. Once we have that in After Effects, what we'll do is we'll go, let's bring up effects and presets, and we'll just type in TV noise. I'll add that effect. And you can see right here is the default setting is a lot of stuff is turned on, a lot of stuff that we probably don't want to. Let's go ahead and put those on top of the glow. So we don't want the glow to actually be distorted. So we'll turn off the glow for now. This is your master effect right here. This is where you're going to control a lot of the details of the effects. But first off, we're going to go ahead and just turn off pretty much everything but the scan lines here. It's really not, again, in this particular case, we're really not interested in any of those. So if we go to scan lines here, let's turn those on. What we're going to see here now is, again, if I scrub through this footage, you can see them, again, those effects sort of scanning up and down the footage. And in this case, it's great, gives us a lot of things. We can turn the speed up, we can turn the thickness way down, 3 to 50. And we can even turn the opacity down if we don't want that to be such a powerful effect on top of our footage. There's also an effect, small scan lines. Let's see here. Which again, those aren't going to move with our footage, but if we turn those down, if we turn the spacing down to a considerable amount, and then turn the thickness down, again, we can really play with this plugin and get some pretty neat settings there. In this case, again, I won't use those. But there you go. Now you can see we have a nice hologram scan lines. And again, as you preview these, if we do a RAM preview here, we may find out that those are a little bit too powerful. So we can turn that opacity down to 10% and see if that's more what we're looking for. Where again, it's a subtle effect. It shouldn't be such a powerful effect that it sort of takes over the footage. There, and I think that looks pretty good. So now we will do our classic. We'll duplicate this layer, grab all these and untick them here. And then we can set this one. Let's see if we set this to add. We can set this to add, or we can set this one to screen. It's probably a little too powerful. We'll boost that down. And again, we can give this a RAM preview here. And again, at this point, we could mess with the settings. You could make the glow on the second layer a little bit softer. You could even do what we did with the glow from the core here before and expand that with a fast blur. But I think that looks pretty good. So the next thing we're going to talk about is this actual volumetric visible light that we see that's actually going to be coming directly up from the emitter and look like it's really creating this hologram in 3D space here. So we'll do that next. Alright, so for our visible or our volumetric light here, there's a number of techniques we could use. We could create a simple 3D layer sitting in space, add a gradient or a ramp in After Effects with a bright white here or a bright blue that fades to a black here, and create a mask that's going to start at the tip of our mesh or the tip of our hologram, go down around our emitter and up to the wing, and set that to add, and set the layer mode to add rather, and then add some glow effects. And that would be a very simple form of the result we're after. But what we're going to use is an effect called CC Radial Blur. And this will allow us to have some light streaks and some details that are borrowed directly from our hologram itself, because that's that's the layer we're using to ultimately generate this blurred effect here, this volumetric light. And so you're going to get a lot of details, and we'll see those in action in a few minutes here. So let's grab our hologram render again. Let's turn off our actual holograms we've done before. And let's go to Effect, Blur, CC Radial Blur. If we change this to Fading Zoom and then crank this amount up, we'll see a simple result of what we're looking at here, which again is this nice radial blur similar to Trapcode Shine. So the problem right now is that it's being the emitter point, the center point for this radial blur is coming directly from the center of our hologram, whereas we want it to be obviously being projected from our emitter down here. What we can do is we can use our holographic, our hollow point, our tracked point to sort of borrow its position and send that directly to our plugin there. However, first let's duplicate that layer and let's change that to volume light point. And that'll make sense in a second. So let's tick off our original point here. Let's go back up to our new layer here. Now the first problem we're going to run into is that this is looking for a 2D position. However, our volume light point is a 3D layer. Now luckily there's an expression here we're going to use. An expression from Baker Toots, who actually has a great tutorial on holograms as well, so I'll link to that here. But we're going to grab this expression here, copy it, and then go back up to our radial blur layer. We're going to alt-click on the stopwatch of our center value here, and that's going to create an expression in After Effects, which we can see right here, and we're going to paste that value here. Now this piece right here, in quotes, needs to be our source layer name, obviously. So if we click off that, we're going to get a little error, and that's okay. Let's go back down, and we called that volume light point. So let's grab that in quotes right again into volume light point. Now, what we're going to have is the position. You can see this position, which turned red, is now being borrowed from our volume light point. Of course, the problem we're seeing right away is that our radial blur here is emitting beyond the ship as opposed to coming from the ship, coming from the emitter. So that's as simple as changing this amount value to a high negative value. So in this case, minus 250. And now you can see we got some nice streaking, some nice blurs emitting or heading down towards our emitter. Now the reason we duplicated this layer is because we want to move this down in 3D space. You can see right now our blurs are sort of coming to an end or coming to a point right here, when in reality we want them to sort of encapsulate the entire emitter. So if we take our volume light point, grab its position, and then move this, move our value up or down, you're going to see that it's going to now, because the two are tied together, it's going to affect those blurs. And so we want to take that and pull it down until it looks like our blur is really coming from, again, the emitter in its entirety here, and that looks pretty nice right there. Now if we set that to add, and again, we can apply some nice glows here. Now let's tick back on. Let's put this under our holograms and turn those back on. And now we're able to see here what I was talking about before, whereas we're getting some nice streaking and some nice detail in our volumetric light that is being created directly from the hologram layer. So you can see we're getting two streaks right here that are coming from these brighter areas. And in this fan right here, we're getting another streak from here. Obviously, we're getting a lot of brightness from this area of the model. And then also notice we're not getting a big giant streak on the end here, because the tips of this model here are so fine and the opacity is so much lower that, again, we wouldn't expect to see this giant bright streak emitting to that side of the model there. The one thing about CC radial blur is that it is going to incur a little bit of a render hog. Once I had my CC radial blur layer, once I adjusted the glows and then the brightness, and I was happy with it, what I did is I went ahead and isolated it and then rendered it by itself on black as its own QuickTime movie, and then just brought that back into the composition. And then again, now I've reduced that render time issue. Obviously, if you ever wanted to go back and change it, you'd have to go back into the source layer here. But that's another trick I use a lot. If I have an effect I've applied that is a particular render hog, once I'm happy with it, I'll go ahead and isolate it and render it out, and then not have to worry about that anymore. Another thing to touch on with, again, the great advantage to using this radial blur layer is, or this radial blur effect, is if I chose to have my spaceship rotating slightly in 3D space, or even full on, animating up and down, the radial blur would actually take that into account. You would see these streaks and you would see these details change and move dynamically, again, because that effect is being derived directly from the hologram render. So that's just another detail, another reason why we're going to use that method as opposed to a similar method to achieve that. So we're almost finished here, just a few more things, and we'll touch on that in a minute. So the last little effect here we're going to add is a flickering effect to our hologram layers, as well as our visible volume light here. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a subtle flickering of the opacity of these layers, which again is something you might expect to see in a real-time 3D hologram projection. For starters, let's tick off both our secondary hologram layer as well as this visible light. So we're only looking at the base hologram layer, and we're going to use a wiggle expression tied to the opacity of this layer to achieve that. So to open the opacity, we're going to alt-click on the stopwatch, which will bring up our expression window here, and we're going to type in wiggle, a parenthesis, and then 2 values. The first value is going to be the frequency or the speed at which we want this wiggle to randomly adjust our opacity, which in this case will be 100, and then a comma, and then the next value is literally the quote-unquote wiggle room that I'm giving this expression. If I were to type in 25 here and then an end parenthesis, what that means is that I'm allowing the wiggle expression to affect our opacity value between 100 and 75%. Obviously, if I typed in 50 there, then that wiggle expression would be able to affect that value between 100 and 50%. Obviously, you can feel free to play around with both of these values. But again, it's just a nice subtle effect that really will finish things off. So we'll copy this exact same expression. We'll show both of these layers now. We'll go to the opacity of our secondary layer here, alt-click and paste it in there. And then we'll go to the opacity of our visible light, alt-click the opacity, and paste the same expression. Like I said, it's a subtle effect you're seeing. What I actually have done is duplicated this effect in its own composition. And here you can see what that effect is really doing, where we're just kind of pulsing or flickering the opacity of our hologram as we're scrubbing through the timeline. And that's about it. After that, I added some sound effects and maybe did some color correcting or boosting the original footage, which was a little too dark. But yeah, that's about it. If you get stuck on a particular area, comment on the video or shoot me a message, and I'll do my best to reply to you and get you all sorted out. So good luck.